once claimed that he believed that the secret to success for my teams was the fact that I knew about 100 different ways to tell him no without ever actually saying the word no. And that did not mean that I just said it in different languages. No is no. I mean, So, and I started to think about that. After all, he was my boss. Well, actually, he wasn't even my boss. He was my boss's boss. So, how do you get out of saying yes to those people? It's doable. It just requires a whole lot of practice. And I mean, a whole lot of practice. And let's face it, the reality is, of course, I said no, saying no on occasion. It's got to happen. But his point, and he made it again when I left AT&T, he took me out to lunch and said, I want to wish you good luck. And he said, I understand you're leaving so that you can start doing workshops on project management. And I said, yes, I am. And he said, good. You might want to add this into the number of things that you help people learn how to do better. And I said, what? And he said, oh, my favorite thing about you. I said, oh, for heaven's sakes. People don't need to be taught how not to say yes. And he said, oh, really? He said, I think it takes a little bit of courage. And I agree. To tell somebody who's your boss's boss that what they're asking for is either not doable, unreasonable, or is going to require additional fill in the blank. Do we need more time for it? Do we need more money for it? Do we need more headcount? Do we need people with specialized talents that we don't have on the team right now? Whatever it is. The thing about this is when you point that out to me, when you don't say yes, then you haven't set yourself and your team up for failure. And you haven't set me up for embarrassment with the rest of the senior leadership team. So I think it's an important thing. And I would really love it if you would start teaching people a little bit better how to do that. Well, I became so convinced that he was wrong that I never really got around to it. I mean, let's face it, I left there ages ago. But recently, especially with the difficulty in communicating as we become a more hybrid or, in many cases, 100% virtual team environment, it started to dawn on me that one of the difficulties in any communication is if somebody makes a request and somebody else has to not say yes. So let's start with a couple of basics. Number one, share the reason that yes might not be a good idea. After all, if you don't want to say yes, the chances are high it's because you've already figured out where some of the minefields lie. That would be an awesome feature to add. And we don't have anybody on the team who can actually design or execute the technology needed to create that feature. Okay. If that's why you're worried about it, how about you share it? Let the person know why you think that it might not be a good idea under these circumstances. They'll thank you for it later. 2, there's this wonderful tool out of improv called Yes and. You don't actually have to use the exact wording. You could say, that's a marvelous idea, and here's what I think we'll probably need in order to execute against it. I can, of course, follow this up with a quick email so that you've got it in writing. You can mull it over. In order to do this, we'll probably need a little bit more time on the schedule because we're already well into testing. And adding this in means we're going to have to cycle back, but we're also probably going to need a couple of extra hands on this. Not to mention that's going to up the budget. So let me outline that for you, and you decide which of those things that you feel that you can give us in order to make that happen. Otherwise, what I'd like for you to do is to outline that feature and let me put it into the change log because it is a great idea and might be exactly where we want to start with for version 2.0. Okay? Yes, and. The reason it's a good idea, and here's what it's going to take in order to execute it. It sounds very much like tip 1, which is share the reason that you think yes would be a bad answer, that you think that no, let's not do that right now is a much better answer. But tip number 1 is about understanding the value of what we're suggesting. And tip number 2 is about a technique for executing it. Tip number 3 goes back to the enlightened triple constraints. Build the relationship that is the foundation of the triple constraints. Build the relationship such that you have a high enough level of trust that you can actually tell somebody, I get that that sounds like a good idea right now. Here's some reasons why it might not work. Not right now, anyway. Still, no mention of the word no. Especially not in that tone of voice. And here's an extra added tip. Remember about your tone of voice. You know, a lot of people like to quote Morabian's percentages of what actually conveys your message. And while most of his model is concerned with when you have conflicting ideas or mixed messages, as we like to call it, there is one rationale behind that model that I think is very important to remember. The percentage that is the smallest is the percentage that rests on the thing that you can most easily manage, your wording. But it takes a little bit more control and a little bit more conscious control to control your verbal and your vocal quality. What's your tone of voice? What's the level of tension in it? What emotion is it conveying? And if you're not paying close attention, no can sound more like, what are you, an idiot? No can sound more like you haven't already given us enough to do in too short a time. You see, it's not really the word no that frequently sinks the boat. It's the tone of voice. So practice a little bit. Develop a habit of being able to say no in a tone of voice that does not sound accusatory. So practice a little bit. Develop a habit of being able to say no in a tone of voice that does not sound accusatory, does not sound like you think the other person is clear out of their minds. A tone of voice that says, no is a reasonable response. No is not claiming that the request is unreasonable. But that's also one of the reasons why I prefer a yes and. It's a technique that works really well, and instead of breaking trust, it builds it. Not a bad idea, because depending on how long you're going to be in that organization or how many projects that you're going to be executing with that senior leader as a sponsor, well, my former boss was quite right. Part of it is because we bear the responsibility of helping them avoid some of the pitfalls that come from when somebody that you're responsible to is too afraid to not say yes. So it is a mutual environment that we create, but we can get it rolling by giving them every reason to trust our counsel and our advice, because we don't always say yes to them. We might say yes and. One last comment. It's yes and, not yes, but. Yes, and here are the reasons why it might not be a good idea right now. Yes, but have you considered? Which would you rather hear? Well, they're in the same situation. I'm KimiKSP, and if these few suggestions have been helpful, please like or subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. This video was brought to you by the Leadership Driven Project Management Academy. Thanks for joining us.